So we're going to talk about Zagara, who is my fourth most played hero. She received a lot of talent reworks. They took away some of her PvE. They tried to give her some PvP. I'm going to talk about a lot of what is wrong with Zagara as opposed to what's right. They put a lot into PvP and they took a lot away, or they put a lot into PvE but took a lot away from PvP. Now she's kind of average at both. When you're average at two things and you don't excel at one thing, you're normally not in the meta. And that's exactly where Zagara is now. No matter how much you want to try and get Zagara in the meta, it's really hard right now. I'm going to talk about probably the best build for her in terms of what she brings to the table, because overall, her split push build is pretty terrible. They buffed Infest. She still spawns multiple things, which is her base kit, right? Which is her E and her W with the roaches and the hunter lisk, and then your banelings that go out. I just feel like there's so much wrong with Zagara because her damage in a team fight isn't enough and her split push isn't enough. If she does one really well and she had the same amount of PvE damage in team fights now, and she did more damage in PvP, she'd be busted. Or vice versa. If she did too much in PvP in team fights, then you have to severely nerf the PvE. And any hero that has summons that can absorb tower shots now become a better PvE hero. And that's why I think they're having so much trouble balancing her. So they tried to put some damage into her PvE stuff by taking away the PvE and putting it into the PvP via talents. I feel like that creates a lot of issues with Zagara. And so your Baneling, you can shoot that out, do some damage. Your Hunter list that or your Hydra list that goes out, your Roaches that spawn. All of these are problems. And this reminds me of if you played Nazeebo back in 2016, I guess. Nazeebo could always do a lot of damage because he throws a lot of stuff out there, but he couldn't kill anybody. Zagara now is Nazeebo 2.0, and I feel like we're now taking her down a realm of taking away her map presence, trying to force her into a team fight. And to be honest with you, the reason why Nazeebo also got nerfed is that he was too strong in a team fight, and it simultaneously affected his split push, so now you have a hero that's too broken. Zagara, same exact thing. So we're going to talk about the most optimal way you can try and fit Zagara into a team fight. Her split pushing days are basically a thing of the past. Can you do it? Yep. Is it good? Not really. Does it require the enemy team to be really bad and let you be AFK? You better believe it. So we're going to talk about ways to fit Zagara into a team fight. So if you are picking Zagara, you have to be a team fight hero. You have to be there at objectives. You have to be there when it matters. And if you're split pushing, I can tell you one thing. As somebody who has relentlessly tried, it is a far cry from where it used to be. And if you're forcing Infest or you're forcing some variation of Nidus split push, it's bad. That's not to say Nidus is a heroic isn't bad, but we're going to talk about how you can fit Nidus in if you still want to get some split push to create a distraction, then join a team fight. That's pretty much all you can do now. So in order to maximize Zagara right now, a lot of it is built around roaches and auto attacks. And why is auto attacks important? Because one thing that people tend to forget is that on your creep tumor, you get extra attack range. And it says your summons move faster. That's not really that big of a deal. But you getting that extra attack range is kind of the precursor to how you can fight better. So putting creep tumor down slightly behind you when you approach a fight and maybe off to the side. The odds are you're going to take splash damage from something that's going to do ground damage and your creep's going to disappear and therefore you lose your advantage. So you don't want to go in and just plop, 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 use all three charges and then just say, you know what, we're fine, let's go fight. Ideally, you want to put one behind you to start the fight so that you can move forward, but also so it doesn't outrange you. As you start to move around, then you can utilize those creep charges to your advantage, which means extra attack range. And when we get down later, we'll talk about some other ways that you can use that. So auto attacking, very important as it is with every hero, but more importantly, getting your creep down and managing your creep because you only have 3 charges. And if they keep taking splash damage, you're hurt in a team fight, and that can be pretty brutal. So the way this is going to work, Volatile Acid, not a big fan. You don't need the extra range, and you don't need the extra damage. I do like the fact that they put damage on this, but overall, you are now basically a poke hero that's going to do a bunch of random damage that doesn't really have that much of an impact in a fight, but you're going to try and do your best. Volatile Acid, I don't think does them. The extra range doesn't matter. The extra damage on the explosion, just not that exciting. 86 damage, you have 4 charges, so theoretically you could do enough for a Flame Strike. The odds of you hitting all 4 are slim to none. These things just don't travel fast enough. It's hard to get people in the same spot. So that's one thing. Another thing that I wish they would do that they did with Junkrat, these go out much faster than Junkrat grenades. And I'm probably guilty of this as well. There's a talent for Junkrat at level 13 that says every time you auto within a fraction of a second after you press Q, your auto does more damage. Theoretically, you should be doing something similar. That's not to say you can't just spam all 4 for either zoning or try and get some burst damage out, but getting a couple out and then autoing and then a couple out and autoing might actually be the more optimal way. It's a little bit more difficult. As Zagara, we're trained to just spam our banelings. But I don't think this is really that good. Corpse Feeders is where it's at. Reduce the cooldown of Infested Drop by 3 seconds, and Roachlings have 30% more health, thus making them much more annoying in a team fight. They don't do a ton of damage, don't get me wrong. They're effective to a degree, but 27 damage per second is not that exciting for 2 roaches that come down. They can add up over time, and we'll talk about that as the talents go. So having these with more health mean that you now have to have the enemy commit more resources. If you're a squishy hero, you know that these are pretty annoying and you do try and take these down, thus eating up 1 or 2 of your autos. If you're a tank, you're probably just shrugging them off for now. But getting the cooldown reduction on this to bring it from 12 seconds to 9 seconds means you have more presence in a team fight because you're getting roaches down more often. Your banelings are going to be meh. Your Hydralisk is just going to die, and it's on a 16-second cooldown, so it doesn't really do much. It does a little damage. This helps you a lot in the solo lane. It forces whoever you're fighting to basically walk away. This is really good early in solo, but it's not that great. So for that reason, Corpse Feeders, and this is going to tie into the build, so don't worry about everything. We'll recap it. Getting the cooldown reduction, plus the roaches being more annoying means that they can get an extra auto or 2 out, which means more damage, which means that they're now not as bad. So at level 4, you can have 2 different schools of thought. More single target damage means Envenom Spines. Activate to have Zagara's next basic attack apply 230 damage over 5 seconds. This is like having a 30-second cooldown on an ability that does 230 damage when your abilities already have a hard time hitting and or staying alive. I don't like this. I do not like this. And I know a lot of people do. I am not a fan of this. I don't like this at all. But considering the alternative, it's not that bad. Medusa Blades, if you're in a team fight, this is terrible. Zagara's auto attacks have been nerfed so much. Her base auto attack damage is somewhere in the low 80s at level 1, if I remember correctly. And it just doesn't bring very much damage as a result. And we had Serrated Spines coming in to where originally when they reworked this was supposed to be better. They nerfed this to where it only does 0.2% damage every time you auto attack. However, this still should be your priority number 1. If you're split pushing, this is really bad. If you're in a 1v1 scenario or you find yourself in a team fight and you're auto attacking, as we mentioned before, and let's say you have creep down so you can auto attack at a much safer distance, things feel a lot better. Serrated Spines still feels like the number 1 pick to me. I do know people that go on Venom Spines. You might even already be typing your response in chat or in the comments below, but I can tell you right now, this is not as good as you think it is. Normally things that do 230 damage. Think Zool, for instance, right? He has a bone spear. Think a lot of these other heroes that have short cooldown reduction on abilities that do damage. The reason why this is 30 seconds is because it's basically a guarantee unless you're blinded, which I don't even know if this works, but Envenom Spines is basically a guaranteed. It's not a skill shot. I just don't like it. It's so, like, 230 damage. Yes, it scales. It does give you single target damage. There is a time for this. There is a place for this, but I think Serrated Spines gives you more consistent value, more damage overall. That's not to say you're going to do enough auto attack damage to equal this, but when it comes to hitting multiple targets over a longer period of time, which is what team fights look like, Serrated Spines for me is better and has better scaling options and a higher ceiling overall than, say, the single target damage I'm going here. If I am going against something that is more AoE healing focused like a Lucio, maybe I change more to the single target damage, but technically this is giving it to me also. I like Serrated Spines. If you're arguing in Venom Spines, go ahead and leave a comment. That's fine. Now, at level 7, there's 2 talents here. One of them should pretty much be your plan A almost all the time, and that's Bile Drop. This passively increases the radius of infested drop because technically it has a damage when it lands, plus the roaches. The enemy team can see the circles. If they can't dodge that circle, then you've done well, or you've had some CC. After you've hit 12 heroes with infested drop, it spawns an additional roachling. Now, this is a little bit more difficult to complete, which is why they gave you the extra radius. I still think that this is generally better because I normally don't have a problem finishing this. This is one of those things that if you don't finish, it's kind of a dead talent. So against multiple melees, I'm fine with this. If I have any form of CC or slows, this should be able to land. I should be able to find it. If this is a wide open map and I'm playing Zagara and Hanamura, probably not ideal. Viscous Acid, though, I think is actually pretty good and oftentimes underrated. Not because it's necessarily going to bring you more damage, but because it brings you control over tanks. Versus a Garrosh, for instance, like Garrosh wants to run at me. Stay away, big fella. Here's a slow. It's 2.5 seconds. And if I'm not spamming my Banelings, I actually have 4 charges of slow if I hit them. It's generally easier to hit at closer ranges than it is at longer ranges. Viscous Acid I actually really like. I don't like Baneling Massacre. This is not a talent that I endorse at all. I used to run something like this in Split Push, but after a while it's kind of diminishing returns. Viscous Acid can be good to control tanks. This isn't really used to set up for kills because normally if you're setting up a kill, they might be running away from you, which means that now a Baneling is trying to chase a moving target. Yeah, it's not good. Bile Drop, you should be going for this because you get the additional roach. And this goes into everything about getting additional damage, having more of a presence in a team fight. And I really think that Bile Drop, once it's completed, does give you that presence in a team fight that is needed. And we're still not even to the best part about this build because of it. So having 3 roaches with more health means more presence in a team fight, which for what it's worth, considering that you are a summoner by 2 of your 3 abilities using summons, this now makes her kit even better, and it's something you need to utilize. Now, at level 10, Devouring Maul is actually pretty good. This is down to 80 seconds. It is a little awkward to land. I find this to be extremely inconsistent, to say the least. It does a little bit of damage, but it can also set up kills. It can interrupt Mosh Pit. It can control frontline, setting up kills, and then preemptively using your Banelings. Your Banelings will explode if they hit the Maul. That used to not happen. They used to just go around it. Now, if you can do that and time your E, you can now set up, if you catch 2 targets, you can drop your E onto that. You can see the cooldown. There's a guaranteed stack or 2 off of your E. 80 seconds cooldown is a pretty long time. Not the worst, but it is a long time. But priming your Q or your E to hit, or both if once you start to get used to it, this does make it a little more difficult for them, and it does allow you to have more damage on abilities that are all skill shots that are not very quickly moving or can be telegraphed because of the circle on the ground. Devouring Maul does do a lot in a team fight. It can save your team from danger. It can help set up so your tank can get into position. It can make it so that if you have a Malfurion or literally anybody with CC, you can put it directly under there. That way, Maul now becomes a setup, a countermeasure, different ways to utilize this. 80-second cooldown, not the worst, not the best. It does minimal damage at best, 4 seconds, 94. So you're looking at approximate 370, 380 damage at level 1. Scales up, of course. So think about slightly more damage than a Twilight Dream without the silence that affects people, and it just puts them in a little gobbly thing. Nidus Network, I think, can be pretty interesting. So passively, you get creep spread 15% farther, and you get extra cooldown reduction on your basic abilities whenever you auto attack, which goes back into the premise of auto attacking being very good. So because of that, the passive alone makes this pretty decent. Forget the global factor. The global factor feels a little bit awkward, but it does give you more map presence as opposed to hearthing and running and moving here. So now you can get levels of split push pressure. As long as I have creep in important vision points, which I'll get back to in just when we're done, as long as I can get to those spots and I can split push, and let's say it's a large 3-lane map, if I can force out a response that isn't a 5-man gank that's murdering me because I have vision using my creep, then I can now make use of that. And then now I have a global to get to the other side. So it's really hard for me to talk about Zagara in a video like this. I do a lot of it in the gameplay when it comes to utilizing Nidus, because there are so many nuances to it, to using it for vision, preemptively setting up your creep pre-level 10 so that you can instantly have an impact at level 10. All of those things are pretty crucial. I normally like to start with having one in the top and bottom lane, and depending on the scenario or where I'm at, I actually don't mind preemptively going back at like level 8 or so, because once you put a Nidus on it, the creep stays there. I can go back, put the creep down in the base, and now I can use that base as a waypoint, essentially, to where I can go there and go back. There's a lot of nuances. If you want to check that out, I'll play it on stream. You can come by and request it. I'm sure I'd play it. But I want to get to the nitty gritty with this, is that the creep spreads 15% farther, which means that thing that I mentioned at the beginning of a team fight, now you can have a bigger impact, you have more vision, and now you're getting cooldown reduction on your abilities that are pretty hefty cooldown reduction. 16 seconds and 12 seconds does mean that it is longer cooldowns that have summons, and so if I can get cooldown reduction on those, that gives me more opportunities, and again, more presence in a team fight. Devouring Maul can be pretty good. Nidus Network, by way of its passive, can be pretty good. If you are using Nidus Network to strictly go and split push, and let's say, like for example, I was playing with a Zagara earlier. The Zagara, we're up 16-1 on the objective, but the enemy team is coming back, and we need to finish this objective before the enemy team comes back. The Zagara is split pushing and never comes down to help with the objective on Infernal Shrines. Then by the time they get there, the enemy team is fighting us 5v4, and Zagara is late to the party, and we all die, and then we lose the objective. That is bad. That is very, very bad. That is bad utilization of your own resources, and it's bad team play. And if you're playing a selfish Zagara, you're probably going to tilt a lot of people. Trust me, I've probably done that. But for Zagara, you need to have team fight presence. You need to be there at objectives. Your split push is not more valuable than an objective. It used to be there were cases where you were more valuable than an objective. You are no longer more valuable than an objective because they've nerfed Nidus Network down to 4 charges. They've nerfed the cooldown reduction on abilities. So your split push is now much worse. So you have to be there. I can't stress that enough. Nidus Network gives you the ability to play global and has team fight presence. You need to utilize that. Now, at level 13, I actually really like 2 talents here, but one of them, Spell Shield, activatable. I say this in a lot of the videos. If you are going against a Pyroblast Kael'thas, a Consume Souls Mephisto, turn off Spell Shield, wait for them to cast it, and then press it. I do think that protective armor can be good. Because there's normally so much AoE splash damage, I think that it's much harder to keep your creep up and to have that permanent 20 armor in a team fight. That and fights tend to move a lot. So it does make it more difficult, I think, to have protective coating, which is why Hydralisk, for me, generally feels like a more consistent, more viable option. I think getting the armor is viable in the right circumstance. If they don't have a lot of splash damage, and I am able to play from a safe distance, and I am managing this, notice I'm saying a lot of variables, then I can go protective coating, Spell Shield in certain circumstances. But for the consistency factor, I really like the Hydralisk Transfusion, because I'm going to get 60% of the damage dealt by Hunters, Killers, basic attacks to heroes, which means that I can cast this on a tank. Tanks have a hard time poking this down because they don't normally have ranged attacks, and so I can use this on a frontliner. I can use this to trade in a 1v1. I can do a lot of things that a lot of people don't expect with this, and it does allow me to stay in a team fight longer, more consistently. That's not to say these other talents don't have places, but a lot of times you're using protective coating, then you're like, ooh, 20 armor, that's really good, which is really good. And then you find yourself in a fight where your creep just keeps getting decimated by random damage from living strikes or living bombs to flame strikes to Asmodean globes to Garrosh pressing Q, literally everything that can come out there, which again is kind of why the passive on this isn't so bad. All of these are good. Generally, I like the transfusion. This is more consistent. The other ones are more circumstantial. Now, here's where the big debate comes in. This is Zagara's big power spike. If you've gone Roaches build, which you should have at this point, you now have the potential to have 3 Roaches come down, plus you have your W. This is where they put some of the power. You already have that team fight presence. Having this attacking the back line, sure, okay. Having this attacking the front line, sure, okay. Now having this attacking the front line and being able to poke down tanks and have that team fight presence and have a bunch of summons, Corrosive Saliva now has your Hunter Killers and your Roachlings deal 1.75% of their maximum health. This is additional damage, albeit the other damage is pretty small anyways. This is now the majority of the damage. If I have 3 roaches that come down and they all attack a Garrosh twice, that's 3 times 1.75 times 2, which is a lot of damage that you're now getting on top of what you're already getting. So now my roaches become a lot more annoying. I add in my Hunter Killer on the same thing. Now I have 4 targets. Now, the bad news, this is where I talk about, it's like old Nazebo. I can't control where these things go, which is now kind of weird. And so maybe they'll attack the off tank and maybe they'll attack Garrosh, which again is a huge deficiency in why you'll have damage. You'll definitely have damage with Zagara as long as you're fighting. You just can't control where it goes. So having another hero on your team that can have more targeted damage, like an auto attacker, generally is better. And hopefully they have some form of burst damage mixed in there, because this is why Zagara can put up numbers, put up plenty of siege damage, put up plenty of team fight damage, but it's not effective damage in the form of making sure something dies. And that's the problem. But Corrosive Saliva, I can press my W onto a target. My E, I can generally press it in an area. If I have a main tank here and their person's here and I'm standing here, I don't have to drop the roaches on top of the target. The splash damage is nice, but it's so minimal, I can actually just drop it south of that target so that I know that that's the only thing that it can attack. So dropping it directly onto a target, not always as beneficial as dropping it beside a target so that you know it will guaranteed attack them. At 1.75% damage is probably going to be more damage than your drop damage anyways, so you can figure out how to utilize that for it to attack multiple times. Now, here's a really interesting one. If you've gone roaches at 1 and 7, and let's say maybe you've gone Nidus, maybe you haven't, you've still gone Devouring Maul, but you're going Serrated Spines. Now, here's where scaling comes into play. Jagged Barbs, I really like this talent, if the circumstances are right. If I know that my creep can stay alive, maybe I went Nidus Network, so this is far behind me. I get the extra range on that creep. I have increased auto attack damage. Now I have even more auto attack range, plus 40% basic attack damage. I remember stacking up in a game on Volskaya a week or so ago, and my auto attacks were hitting for around 260, and then I think I got up to like 300. For Zagara to have auto attack damage in the 260 to 300 range now far outweighs a lot of ranged auto attackers that are out there. This is circumstantial because if all my creep is doing is dying and I'm not managing it well, then Jagged Barbs feels pretty bad. But I can press D shortly behind me, start to auto attack a bunch, get cooldown reduction if I went Nidus, get auto attack damage, have much stronger team fight presence, and now all of a sudden I'm doing a lot of single target damage that I wasn't doing before. Thus, all that random effective, non-effective damage of focus damage that I'm doing now becomes more focused, and I have a stronger presence in a fight. It is a little bit hard on who you're going to attack because your other stuff is attacking whatever, but once you can start to hone this in, Jagged Barbs, I think, take Zagara to another level. The problem is, do I always have, are they diving at me? Am I playing against the dive team that even allows me to put creep down? So for that, Jagged Barbs, I think, is actually pretty good because of the auto attack, because of the build that you're going, and because you've went Serrated Spines. If you end up going in Venom Spines, I'm not a big a fan as Jagged Barbs then. If I went in Venom Spines, then I'm probably going to look towards Corrosive Saliva. My single target damage doesn't feel as strong as Serrated Spines with that, because now my auto attacks feel good, my single target damage feels good. I think a lot of that is based around our 16 talents. This is our biggest power spike in the game by far. Everything else just feels kind of weird. Bile Drop is, if you don't complete it, it's weird. I wish they would do something different with it. Serrated Spines, I just feel like her talents don't allow Zagara to excel, because if the PvE side gets good, it probably will simultaneously affect the PvP, and then she'll be too good. So that's going into 16. Going into 20, this is probably the most probably the most underwhelming level 20 talents in the game. Hands down, by far. If I went Nidus Network, Endless Creep is the only thing I'll go. If I went Devouring Maul, Tyrant Maul is the only thing I'll go. You don't have really much of a choice. Now, one thing is, if you're a Zagara player, you should be very apt to watching the minimap. And this is where we'll start to touch on some of the creep stuff. As it stands, you have to put the creep down somewhat near you. With Endless Creep now, I can now gain vision and choke points. Are we doing a boss? Do we need to put vision over here that we don't normally have? A lot of things now become easier to grant vision. I can preemptively set up for a fight. If it's Cursed Hollow and I know where the next objective is going to be, or any of those things, I can now start to put creep there preemptively, start spreading that out to take advantage of maybe my 16 talent, so I don't have to try and figure it all out at once. I also don't have to put it down right beside me, because if I had extra range on this, on my creep spreads 15% farther, now I can put this down and I don't have to be there. I can actually put it down behind me and wait for it to come to me, and then I'll have that extra range. So a lot of this does kind of help in the later game because it grants you vision. I don't care about the movement speed. It does last longer, 10 minutes, but I mean, if you're getting, if you're playing 10 minutes past level 20, I'm sorry. These talents just feel very underwhelming. So Endless Creep allows you to get vision in places you couldn't get before. You can now spot rotations, and it keeps your team safer. You can even get vision for your teammates, right? They're 4-person pushing in another lane. You put down creep. You can put creep down on a boss that you couldn't normally get to. Let's say you're like, ooh, I wonder if they're on the boss. We need to know as soon as they're on the boss. I can put my creep down from a safe distance without being ganked instead of walking all the way to the boss. So there's a lot of different things you can do with creep to get vision. Choke points, and you should be setting this up no matter what. If I'm anywhere on the map as Zagara, it's kind of like using the mines as an abather. I would like to put, like, I would rather have vision than I would have damage, because I can't do damage if I'm dead, and I don't know if I'm going to die unless I know where the enemy team is. If I can see all 5 of them on the minimap, that's fantastic. If I see 3 people on the minimap, I have to think differently as Zagara and run like hell, because I don't know where they're at unless I just saw a camp picked up, or I know that exactly where they're at with 100% certainty. So the creep gives you that ability to put it in choke points from level 1 to level 20, doing it from a distance. But this is where I'm going to talk about creep. If you're not putting creep down in choke points that come to your lane and you are pushing down a lane, you are not doing well. You are now susceptible to ganks, and I don't mean just put it in one choke point. I'm talking about covering full choke points so that you can have the earliest warning detection and then start to move as soon as necessary. Because if you're not doing that, it's going to be a pretty brutal day overall as Zagara. If you're dying once or twice in a lane, in a solo lane, and you're pushing it out, it's your fault. It is not your team's fault that they didn't tell you somebody was coming. It's not your team's fault that you pushed down that lane. It is your fault as a Zagara if you get caught out. And that is easily curable by putting vision down, looking at the minimap, reading a minimap, and putting vision down. And if you can't do those 3 things, you don't deserve to push out a lane. That's called running it down and basically inting. Don't do it. Now focusing on the level 20, Tyrant Maul does 50% more damage. This actually does a decent amount of damage once you get the more damage, because it ticks 4 times. And it reduces the cooldown for each person, or takedowns reduce its cooldown by 25 seconds. So getting the cooldown reduction on this means you get cooldown reduction. This used to be, I think, it used to get cooldown reduction based on how many you captured or something. But now it does more damage, and takedowns reduce its cooldown by 25 seconds. Thanks Orphea's cooldown. But again, level 20 talents that give you cooldown reduction in this degree, Falstad's Hinterland's Blast, like Garrosh's is entirely different. If you get a kill off taunt, that's a 5-second taunt. But a lot of Orphea, her crushing jaws give her instant reset. Sadly, for Zagara, you get 25-second cooldown. If I'm not killing somebody and changing a fight, that 25 seconds doesn't matter to me. This is a big explosive fight post level 20. So even if I get the kill, or we get the kills, the odds of me getting multiple Devouring Mauls in a fight are slim to none. And if we do, like, I don't think I need Maul to get that 3rd and 4th kill, or the 4th kill at that point. So Maul at this point is just kind of weird. I don't like the cooldown reduction element on this. I think it's bad. Anything that gives me cooldown reduction on takedowns that isn't an instant or 5-second cooldown, it doesn't reflect level 20 fights. Post level 20 fights, you're either dead or you're alive. There's no in between. There's no like, ooh, I can't wait to have this again for the next fight. It's an 80-second cooldown. You'll have it for the next fight. I don't know what you're going to need a cooldown for. So I think this is just absolutely a terrible upgrade for this. The only thing I like about it is the damage. And again, Fury of the Storm is bad. Don't go this. I wish they would remove this from the game. I don't like this at all. I don't know why this is in the game. I actually have no idea why this is in the game. It's a historically bad talent. It only exists on a few. And that's why I said her level 20s are some of the most underwhelming talents in the game. Tyrant Maul with the extra damage is about it. Anything that does 50% more damage and a cooldown reduction, one of those is effective. One of them doesn't matter. Endless Creep, I get Vision. My 4th most played hero, trust me. I got feelings. I got feelings invested here. Anyways, that's Zagara, man. You can really try and get a lot. Vision, effective damage will always be there, but your presence is the most important thing to play in Zagara. You being at a team fight, you making sure that you're supporting your teammates, you split pushing and not warning your teammates. Yes, you might be able to get a fort. Somebody tried to do this on a Dahaka video. Think for yourself, right? If you think, oh, I can get a fort and then I can join the fight, sure, that's fine. But you have to at least type to your teammates, or like, I'm getting fort, then I'll be there. If that fort has a gate or a tower still in front of it, and you only have one wave of minions, I can tell you one thing, and it's post level 10, you're not getting that fort for at least 30 to 45 seconds. So if you're just like, I'm going to split push for an extra 45 seconds, good luck on the objective, you're screwing your team over. Stop thinking that, right? There's a difference between like if that fort's at 10 or 20% health. Yes, then you can siege up on it and then go. If that fort's at like 90 to 100% health, again, your split push value is nowhere near as strong as it was before. Even with Infest, it's not that great because normally your Infest damage has a massive climb post level 20, not necessarily pre or right around level 10. You don't do enough siege damage for that 1% to matter. And it just doesn't feel the same. Even despite the buffs of the 125% baseline of that, it's not as good. Start to focus on team fighting as Zagara. Again, if you're picking Zagara for split push, there's a better hero to do that. If you're picking Zagara strictly for a team fight, there's probably better heroes to do that. That's not to say that there's not certain circumstances where they're actually pretty good, but you also need to make sure that you have fully taken control of what your hero can do in a fight and on the map. And Zagara is a very delicate balance of you have to maximize your efforts as a global hero if you're going that way, and you have to maximize your efforts as a team fight hero. Because if you do one 10% less and the other 5% less, your value as a hero plummets to probably the bottom 10% of heroes in the game because you're not doing enough in a specialized department, and you're not capable of doing one like you could before with split pushing, and you're not capable of doing the same type of damage in a team fight as basically every other ranged assassin. So Zagara right now, it hurts me to say this, but until they start to find a way to reel back her PvP damage and put more into PvE, I think she's going to consider to be still in the same spot. And there's a reason why her PvE damage was nerfed, because it also affects her PvP, thus making her too strong. And so that delicate balance of balancing one versus the other is very hard with a hero that has two abilities that summon things that can live and take shots and then therefore get split push value and do damage. So right now, Zagara is kind of in a weird spot unless the meta somehow changes or they make some drastic game changes. Zagara, I think, is going to continue to be in this spot. She's not a bad hero. If you get maximum split pressure and you get maximum team fight value, she's no longer in that bottom 10% of the heroes, and now she feels really effective. If you can bamboozle somebody to come up there and force them to go, and then you hightail it down there, and you're there for your team, you're doing good. If you're doing one and not the other, make sure that one is team fighting, because else you're hurting yourself and you're hurting your team and you're hurting your chances. Zagara still can be a very good hero. I know a lot of you are going to say, I split push and I have a 55% win record. Guess what? It's because the other team is bad. They don't know how to deal with it. But in reality, if you try and climb with this hero, you're going to find that it gets tougher and tougher no matter what. Having a 55% win rate can be good. Having a 50% win rate with a hero shows that it has weaknesses and strengths, and it's a coin flip. So that's Zagara. We've had a lot of requests for this, so we did the Zagara video. I hate to hurt everybody's feelings that are Zagara mains. She's just nowhere near as good as she used to be in one department. She's better in team fighting, and even that is subpar compared to other heroes. So you got to be on your toes as Zagara. Use your vision. Be at team fights. Be at objectives, and hopefully it all works out for you, because you can be the difference maker in a fight with those things in your control. It takes a lot of effort, and so hopefully it works out for you.